like to welcome everybody to the Hire Talent podcast, optimizing the hiring process for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. And I've got a fantastic guest, Damien, from Scalable Path, excuse me, I'll get that right. Scalable Path. And, I think right before this, we were chatting a little bit about why he created this company. And maybe you can share with us a little bit about your journey towards that. You mentioned it was kind of a reaction to this Upwork community. And I totally get it. So, share your journey a little bit, and then about why you created Scalable Path and what problem it's solving for folks these days.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Fletcher. Well, if you want to hear more of the story, I think a key moment was when I was back in, I was living in India. I was up on my laptop at night at 10 at night, talking with my colleagues in San Francisco, and I'd shut my laptop at 11 or 12, and I'd be going, this isn't working that well. There's probably a better way. And when I came back to San Francisco, I started working with some developers in Latin America, and it worked really well from both a time zone and a cultural perspective. And back in 2010, I founded Scalable Path. Since then, we've grown to have 23,000 developer profiles in the system. Wow. And we've placed over 500 developers with 300 different clients.
Nice.
And so, yeah, you mentioned Upwork. Scalable Path and some of the other companies in sort of the premium talent marketplace space are a bit of a reaction to what's happened on Upwork, where you've got to navigate a lot yourself. You've got to spend time. You've got to have the expertise to really know to write a great job description. Then you've got to sift through a bunch of applicants and figure out, okay, how do I know these people really know what they're doing, especially if they're a developer? And then, if I'm not a developer, how do I vet them? How do I know if the guy who wants $20 an hour is better than the guy who wants $150 an hour? So
what kind of clients do you find yourself working with typically?
It's really across the board. I mean, it seems like every company has a software component these days. Everyone's got a website. And yes, some clients that just need a simple marketing website. That's not typically our expertise. We're more in the custom software development space.
Yeah. So these tend to be smaller entrepreneurial type businesses to supplementing larger companies in their development teams?
It's both. I think our style really resonates more with startups. I tend to be kind of just a scrappy, get it done kind of person. And the world, probably the majority of our clients are startups. We do work with some larger companies as well, like BuzzFeed and, some companies that do have like thousands of employees, and those relationships are great. But I think we're particularly good at helping people start from a pretty early stage. And that's one of the value adds we have, I think.
So are people like, I've got an idea for an application that I want to build, and then I come to you, or am I had the idea, went to Upwork, tried to hire a few people, and I think many journeys. I mean, I've had this journey, right? Go to Upwork and hire a developer and tell them, this is my vision, build this for me, and then it sort of didn't go very well. And now I'm like, okay, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, and we can do that level of early level consulting too, and we've done it with founders where they have an idea. We actually have a process where we can take them through. Okay, the first step is really defining your requirements. We've actually developed our own template for a requirements document that kind of strikes the right balance between being agile but also planning. There's sort of this tension between these two worlds where, in the past, in the software world, it was like, let's spend months writing everything down and documenting requirements, and then we'll throw it over the fence to a software team, and then they'll come back in a long time, and then we'll see what we got, and we might go, yikes, that's not what we wanted.
Yeah, well, not what I envisioned.
And really the popular thing lately is going agile, where you kind of just you don't spend so much time up front planning, but you dive into it, you release quickly, and then you iterate, you get feedback, and that's all fine and well, but like, there is a balance. You don't necessarily want to just hire a developer and hope for the best. You need to know, this might take me 3 or 4 months and cost me X amount of money. Like, am I ready for this? I need to know what I'm getting into. And so taking like a few days and really defining the requirements to the point where a software developer can give you a reasonable estimate is worth your time, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned this, like defining like the job description. And I mean, this is, we teach like what we call a fact-driven hiring system. So getting that foundation, which is all about that job analysis, the job description, figuring out who that ideal candidate is in the scorecard, how you're going to evaluate whether you got that right person, is kind of the journey there. And that's can be a difficult task, especially when you start to venture into a zone of where you have no expertise, right? Like maybe software, you're a founder, you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, or you have a completely different kind of business right now. You've got this idea to develop an application of some sort, right? How do you even begin to create a job description, figure out that scope of work, right?
I mean, it sounds like you've got like some opinions on what makes a good job description yourself, and sort of a methodology yourself.
I have a feeling we're probably aligned.
I mean, we definitely have. It's probably the most important part of our process, and every time we try to shortcut it, we regret it. Like every time someone comes to me and says, "Hey, Damien, I just need a React developer. Who have you got?" And I sometimes I'm tempted to just sort of say, "Oh, well, let me just show you a few candidates." And I always end up saying, we need to go through and write this job description, and we have a tool that we use internally, and it's got something like, I would say 15 or 20 parts to it, and
it's in depth.
and like you said, there's, I mean, I don't know how deep you want to go in that right now, but it's crucial,
I mean, I think it's a big part of it. I mean, look, I'm just like you, I've skipped that step, and I've looked at, our journey in, working with our clients, and that's just like an overlooked step. We all just want to get to the hire, right? Like, oh, I need a salesperson, I need a developer, I need a whatever. Let's just go out there, let's find them. Oh, that person seems great. But and every time you skip a step in the process, it really reduces your chances for long-term success. And this whole, like, getting the job description, the scope of work, the understanding of like who you really need down, and spending the time, and we're all, as leaders, we tend to, we're so just like immediate satisfaction. Well, many of us, right? We just want it now, right? And it's so easy of a step to skip, right? How do we pause? How do we get that through our heads that we need to just like slow down and really take our time with this planning stage before we jump into hiring?
Well, it's always a reminder that I've skipped it when, you're talking to candidates and you're saying, "Hey, I have this opportunity. Are you interested?" And then they go, "Well, tell me about it." Because really, candidates in these days are in the driver's seat, right? The balance of power has shifted in the talent space,
even with the offshore people.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's all relative. I think that offshore people are still probably a little more you know, have less access to tons of opportunities. But I mean, I don't want to go off the job description topic
Yeah.
too far,
Yeah.
but we can come back to that. But yeah, man, with COVID and everyone going remote, you know, I think people said, okay, I wasn't sure about being remote before. Now I'm sure about it. It's not even a thing. And if I was willing to hire someone, you know, in the next city, why not the next country? And it really, what we found was that, you know, in geographies that we focused in, like Latin America, that it was a lot of companies were making that leap and competing more for those top developers in countries like Brazil.
So you get into it, right? You kind of have a fuzzy job description. You go to a person who, you know, you think is your React or Java person or whatever, and you go, hey, I got this great opportunity, and they say, well, what is it? And you give them kind of,
darn it, I shouldn't have shortcutted this, you know, and now you got to go back. And that's when you go back to the client and you go, you know what? I wanted to just sort of help you out and save you some work as the client or as the hirer, but you know, it's going to behoove all of us. I usually say it takes only about 30 minutes collectively. You know, maybe it takes one person's just got to do the draft, right? And usually someone like the hirer has something lying around that they put somewhere else and as a starting point, and then we'll take that and say, all right, we filled in these gaps, took 10 minutes just to do that. Now you look at it for 10 minutes, you fill it in, and then maybe we'll take another stab at it and we're done in 30 minutes over, you know, back and forth, or maybe even asynchronously. And it's really not that much work.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tedious task, but at the end of the day, it's not that much work. And, you know, again, our lack of attention spans sort of draw us away from doing these types of things. But, you know, taking that time to get that clarity is really big. What about setting like measurable outcomes for developers? You know, some roles I feel like it's easier to do than others. It's something that you can do with a developer.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, you touched on one thing, which is like scoring, and I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but you know, one unique thing we do, and I think it's easier to do with developers than potentially other more managerial roles. But you know, part of our job description tool is we say these are the required skills, these are the strongly preferred skills, and these are the nice to have skills. And then even within those subgroupings, we'll have, this is the importance level, like this is this is the skill level within that. So let's say that it's a developer, they must have a level of expert here, or that's nice to have if they, you know, are a beginner here. And that really gives the person searching like a much richer, true framework of
what you're looking for, who you're looking for,
who can fit, and where you're willing to be flexible as a hirer. You know, you might, instead of just saying, here's a list and here's 10 skills that I'm interested in, and I don't know what you're willing to compromise on if you had to, like, what are the things you have to have, and what things
people aren't unicorns, right? Unfortunately. We'd like them to be, but the reality is in hiring that nobody's ever an absolute perfect match, other than they're so imperfectly perfect, I think, right? Oftentimes. But yeah, I think that is exactly what we talk about when you talk about candidate scorecard, right? Is, you know, your must-haves, nice to haves, deal breakers, you know, I guess they're in there too. But oftentimes you start with a list of bazillion things, right? And you know, then it's like, okay, let's sort this more intelligently and meaningfully, and then hopefully you even eliminate a lot of those things.
You don't want to intimidate people too. We try to keep it at like 10-ish or less kind of skills. And and our system actually, has very structured data, so we can just push a button and it'll say like, okay, rank all 23,000 people in our database
Yeah.
on this scoring criteria, and then the system will say, okay, here's who I think are the best fit, and then a person chooses whether to invite them or not. But yeah, you've got that initial sort of matrix and scoring, but then what we do, you mentioned measurable outcomes, and I think there's a couple points that come to mind there. I mean, you've got to treat every interview process the same. Everybody's got to go through the same thing, so you can compare apples to apples. If you ask different questions, or different people are doing different things, and then you kind of try to look, okay, we've got these 5 people. Well, how do you compare if you didn't put them through the same process? So that's fundamental.
Yeah. So you set the foundation, right? Or the framework, right? That's the job description, analysis, the scorecard. What are we really looking for? What skills, qualities, experiences do we really need? And again, I can never stop emphasizing how important it is to go through those exercises, 30 minutes, hour, a little bit of time, but just to really focus in on that. And so that sets you up to then begin to figure out how you're going to build your pool, attract the folks. And now, obviously, that's a part of what you solve when it comes to coming to particularly tech talent, it sounds like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you attract these people, though? And it is a super competitive marketplace, right, out there. And we've got to be able to differentiate ourselves from one person to the next, or one place to the next, right? So that's something that I don't. You touched on it earlier. Even though they're offshore, I think there's a misconception here that these people are, all eager looking for work. I mean, no, they're evaluating their opportunities too. So how do you make your opportunity more attractive than the next?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's certain areas of the world that are becoming more globalized, more like hiring domestically, and Latin America is one of them. And yeah, I don't think it behooves us to sort of treat people in other countries as having that much of a different psychology about
work.
what company they want to work with. I think that the motivators that you would find here are similar. Of course you have money, right? That's a given, but I think that it sounds cliche, but I think that people everywhere are caring a lot about the mission of the company and feeling some sort of purpose in what they're doing, and that is truly what retains people. So weaving that into your job description, I think, is really important. You've got to sell it. And there's a section in our job description, just tell us about your company and what your mission is. And that's where you can say like, hey, we're a stable company, or these are some impressive metrics that we have, achieved thus far, or, or this is our mission, and this is why we're changing the word for the better, and you've got to think of your JD as a bit of a sales pitch in some places, and so that is the first step, I think, to attracting people.
Yeah. How do you deal with the culture aspect? I mean, just company culture. I mean, obviously there's these geographic cultures, but maybe Latin American versus North American, or whatever it might be, Asian versus North American cultures, but more so the company culture side of that, right? Is there, how do you address that? How do you make that part of the attraction piece in a dispersed workforce like this?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I would say that, you can, as a person who's helping clients build teams or hire people, I tend to end up engaging myself with or our company engages with clients that I think we feel have a good culture as well. And we can be discerning too in our jobs as recruiters, or,
Yeah.
we're,
To
you can call
decide
it,
what projects to take on or which clients to take on.
yeah. And I tend to, when we're even having those initial discussions about, hey, like, this is how we tend to work. How do you guys work? And you're having that initial call with the client. You're getting a sense of what their vibe is. And are they, a friendly person? Are they a flexible person? Do they have a sense of humor? And you kind of start meeting some people, and it tends to be, those are the type of clients we want to engage with. So, yes, there are sometimes clients that might have we've had clients where some of them have, a developer on the team who's sort of a gatekeeper, who's very serious, or,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of that comes out, in every process. You're at some point, the candidate is going to talk to the end company, in one or two, or hopefully you don't drag it out too long. That's a whole other topic, right? We
Yeah.
call it interview fatigue.
Yeah.
But they're going to get to know each other there, in that interview. I think the best thing that I've got is to try to get a sense, capture that a little bit in the company description, in the job description, and just see if the developer or the candidate just connects with the client when they're talking to them one-on-one. But I don't know if you have other thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's a difficult thing. How do you even describe company culture? And is it even real what you think it is, right? It's a huge topic, and it's a buzzword, I think. And I think it is a real thing. I think it's a reality that there is a culture, and so I am actually toying with this, idea more and more myself, right? I think about, what's in it for employees. Well, first of all, it's quality of life. That's all we want, right? We're all human beings.
Yes.
We're all here on
Yes.
Earth. We're all animals. We're all looking to enhance our quality of life, right? And that'll something different to us. And the three drivers at work a lot of times are compensation, obviously, but career growth, I think, is the other one, and then culture. And culture being one of the hardest ones to define and to describe and to value, or to evaluate. We want people who culture fits, but as an employee, you're going to spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week in this environment, right? Is this the place where I'm going to enrich myself? Am I going to feel, is it going to be aligned with my values? Or they're going to be aligned with mine, or can I be aligned with theirs? Can I get excited? Can I feel like there's a community here? Maybe that's a better way to think about, cultures. Community, is this place I want to be a part of? And how do you describe that? And is it real? Is it more than just core values on a piece of paper, right?
Yeah. Well, I think some of the stuff you're touching on might be icing on the cake, okay, do I really click with everyone on this team and feel this certain energy? But I would say that if that's the frosting or the icing, there's a cake which underlies all of them, which are just values that I think every person and company should have, which are things like empathy, trust. Are we treating each other like humans? Are we being flexible? Are we being reasonable? I don't think you necessarily have to feel like you want to go and get a beer with everyone in your company afterward. But if you're being treated with respect and reasonably, and you have as you said, a good quality of life, I think you can still be very happy in a job.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. And I think a lot of people argue, right, like particularly compensation. Obviously compensation is a direct correlation to my quality of life, right? What I can afford, flexibility, or how I can take care of my family and things like that. But you hear about this, oftentimes people highly compensated take lesser jobs because of that, maybe that's the environment, which is
Yeah.
culture, right? It's all part of that, right? Or even career growth. I mean, people get stagnant. And I think developers probably are big that way too. I think they're really big on, and that may not mean like going to become CTO. It's just like, if they're doing the same thing over and over and over every day, they get bored, right?
They get bored, and they know their skill set is becoming less relevant. You're always got to be learning. You've always got to be keeping up to date with the newest technologies. And if they're not using those new technologies, they may feel they're falling behind, but people do like learning. Another thing you touched on, which again, it's not some abstract, culture thing. There's just fundamentals like, am I being pushed too hard?
Yeah.
Am I having too much stress being put on me? Unreasonable deadlines, that kind of bad culture. If you can eliminate the bad things, I think that can go a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a big challenge with dispersed workforces, and a lot of people deal with this or can't get their head around it, and I get it. I mean, obviously you have everybody in the office. Many of us obviously gone fully remote. We did. I'm sitting in my spare bedroom, everybody else. But and we've embraced it, but I have a lot of clients who they just can't get around it, right? They're just like, we've got everybody in the office, and you're advocating obviously for a fully dispersed, or at least a portion of the team being dispersed. How do you make that work? I guess, right?
If people are make transitioning to remote work, or how do you make it work if part of the team is still in the office and the other part is remote?
Yeah, well, let's tackle that. I think that's particularly challenging because you're probably facing that more with this outsourced developers. We started that way. Now we're all remote. So now we're on equal playing field, but our development team has always been remote, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's key. I mean, I'm a big believer. I'm drinking the remote Kool-Aid admittedly. I just read the book Remote by David Heinemeier Hansson and Jason Fried. That would be a book I would recommend to people who are not embracing it. That's really but one of the points in that book is, like you mentioned, the having a level playing field. It can not work well when you have that dynamic where remote people are somehow not first-class citizens and they have certain disadvantages. I think that it works better when you can do a test project. They recommend doing, taking a subset of people and maybe not just, you don't have to go full remote off the bat, maybe doing a couple days away from the office. But ultimately, I think it does work better if you deploy it evenly across your team. Just because they can go in the office doesn't mean, like, if they're local and they could, that doesn't mean they should. They might really enjoy working from home part of the time. And that might level that playing field. If you were going to hire a developer in Brazil and you had a developer in Chicago, well, let the guy from Chicago work from home too. And then they're starting to use the same communication techniques, and everybody feels like they can contribute equally on a meeting because they're using the same style.
You said something earlier that really resonated me, and I'm totally guilty of this from my early days of hiring remote workers, is just kind of treating them like second-class citizens, right? And how do people, don't do that. I mean, it's terrible. And again, I have to admit, I've been guilty of that, right? And I've learned, it took me a long time to learn, and but how do you get over that? How do you, like, if you're kind of new to this or you're starting to do that, change your mindset? But how do you change that mindset, I guess?
Well, I mean, I'd come back to my previous point, which is, if you are thinking that this person is somehow different because they're remote, then, maybe everyone should try working remotely a bit, I think if you ask most people, they would enjoy working remotely part of the time. And why not give that to everyone? Why it's such a, if you have a job that requires in person for some reason, like you're selling phones at Best Buy. Okay, you're not going to do it remotely, but most jobs, they don't have that component. So why are we holding on to this, gas guzzling 30-minute, hour-long commute? It's not good for the environment. It's not good for our ergonomics sitting in a car. It's not good for our productivity. There are so many
in our family lives, right? Like being able to see your wife and your kids or your significant other, right? And be able to just spend a little bit of time with them at lunch or whatever, or to take them to school, right? Where maybe you couldn't do that before, right? I mean, that's that's a huge quality of life factor.
Or even to get uninterrupted focus work done. The office is more full of distractions. I love that. I mean, I'm definitely grabbing things from the book, but if you ask people, where do you go when you really have to get an important big task done? It's typically not the office.
Yeah. I save it for the week. I save it for the week.
Yeah. Or I go in before anybody's there.
Or I stay late. Right.
So that's when someone can come over and tap you and be like, hey, what's up? Like, and you keep getting interrupted. So I think it's the future.
Yeah,
really.
That was one of my biggest epiphanies, right? When we went fully remote, and I'm the worst boss ever, right? I'm like tapping on the shoulder, like, hey, I got this great idea. Like, oh man, like I'm just killing my own productivity, right? And I think the benefit of remote for us, is that it forced structure, right? I'm an EOS fan, right?
We're on EOS too.
Yeah. Or some version of it. I mean, it won't be perfect, right? I mean, but it creates structure to how you communicate and how you interact and how you tackle goals and objectives, right? And and being in office actually like sort of is counter to EOS in some ways, because it allows you to be totally unstructured about how you do these things, right?
Right. You need to get your rocks done. You don't need a bunch of sand and pebbles going into your jar, right? And that's what happens at the office, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so, I think productivity and also I think just if you are a manager like me, who's like, really enthusiastic, got a million ideas, helps kind of keep you under control and let people do their job and just, to inspect, at the appropriate intervals, which is daily. I mean, we have stand-ups every day. We're looking, we're tracking, we also have to strengthen our tracking, our metrics and things like that, right? So actually everything becomes a lot more transparent actually in some ways, when you do this, but it is a learning curve, right? You have to really force yourself to do it, and to embrace it, I think, right? So
but it is very freeing and it can lock you in to never letting go of work. That's actually the bigger risk. It's not that work's not going to get done, it's that you're never going to stop working. And that's what I have to be careful about.
Well, I know you want to talk about the biggest myth about hiring, and we'll kind of close on that, and I'll ask you then 3 things we can do tomorrow if we want to consider hiring remote developers. What is the biggest myth about hiring remote developers, and what do you see from your clients or people they start talking about that?
Well, Fletcher, I think we've covered a lot of what I would have talked about if you asked me that at the beginning of the podcast.
Okay.
Right? about the treating them as second-class citizens,
Yeah.
or that they would be less productive, or, you know, things like that. So I think you've kind of tapped me out on that subject already.
Well, I think the funny thing about that is it's so true no matter who you're hiring. I mean, all of these myths, all of these issues that we talked about, you know, whether they're remote and they're in Central America or India or wherever, or they're here in California in your office, you know, I think they're so true. It's so universally true, and I think that, you know, is really the myth we've got to bust. And I think you're right. You nailed it. Yeah, you know, that's really pretty cool.
One thing that comes to mind that it's not only applicable to remote, it's just a myth, is I think in the hiring process, there has been a bad practice traditionally of giving people questions or exercises in a vetting process, whether that's in an interview, that are these really kind of esoteric sort of problem solving things. Like for programmers, you might be asked to write code on a whiteboard, which you would never do as a developer, for example, or write some complicated sorting algorithm, you know, to really prove that, you know, that some really niche thing you remembered from computer science school that you would never use day to day. And I think that whether you're hiring for a developer or any role, I think when you're vetting people, you want to give them real world, everyday challenges, right?
Practical stuff.
Yeah. So for what we do is we
work like a working interview, a project.
Like, okay, let's spend an hour and say, okay, for a developer, if you're interviewing to be a back-end Python developer who's going to be building APIs, let's build a back-end Python API. You can use Google. You can use your own computer.
You can ask questions.
Yeah, we can talk about it. You can do whatever you want, just like you were actually building it. And that's how we judge you. Not like, put you under a spotlight, you get really nervous, something you don't do all the time, and you don't, your best self doesn't come out. So I want to get rid of that.
And you're dealing with introverts too. And I have a whole, I can be talking about an hour on that. I have clients come to me all the time and say, well, you know, I didn't like their personality. And like, you're hiring an introvert for an introverted job. Like, no offense, they're not going to, like, you know, they're actually quite wonderful people. I'm married to an extreme introvert. My favorite employee is Weston. You know, he is the most introverted guy I've ever met, you know, but they are actually really interesting people when you get to know them and you create an environment that's inviting for them to open up, right? But that's not their natural, like, they're not going to be here the life of the party type of person, right? And we like hold that against people for some reason, like what, you know, it's like crazy. And they get nervous. They're thoughtful, right? You ask them a tough question, they're not going to just bounce back with an answer, right? You know, like maybe some extroverts like me would do, right? You know, they're gonna think and be methodical and careful, and that's exactly what you want, right, out of these people, right? That's why you're hiring them, because that's the quality that makes them great, right? You know, they wouldn't be a great developer if they just off cuff ad-libbed everything they did. You know, that's why I'm not a developer, right? You know,
I totally agree.
Yeah. So no, I think it's really, you know, interesting point there. So what are, like, if you were gonna start hiring offshore, you know, remote workers or developers, what are like 3 things you would do, you know, you could maybe begin doing tomorrow in order to be more successful at that?
Well,
rehash some that we've talked about.
I think you've got to write a strong job description that not only really, you know, describes what you need, and sometimes that makes you think about what you really need yourself, and go through that exercise, sell the position a bit, and then you've got to decide how you're going to get the word out there. I think you asked me about that earlier, and we didn't really touch on it. I mean, there are tons of job sites out there that you can use. You've got LinkedIn, of course. It's expensive, but
Yeah.
you can do that. Or, you know, you can try to engage with a company like us who can help you.
Specialist.
But you've got to promote it in some way. Yeah, I think, and then embrace, I mean, this may be obvious, but you know, you gotta have to come up with your virtual interview process, right? And ours involves, you know, for example, when people apply, they answer a questionnaire, right? But to develop and determine a repeatable, consistent interview process, and you have to do that remotely, you know, and take good notes, right? Record interviews, and then you'll be able to, when people go through that process, you'll be able to compare apples to apples and make a decision.
Yeah. So gotta get clear. You gotta promote the opportunity, and there's lots of different channels there. We didn't talk about that too much, but it definitely, when you're talking about roles like this, I do encourage clients to look at specialists, and you know, as part of one of the recipes there's kind of 5 channels, but hiring a headhunter who knows what they're doing in that vertical or that space that you're in is important. Too many times people hire ones that are generalists, right? And having a structured selection process is huge. And again, many of us make that mistake. No matter what role we're hiring for, it's not structured, right? It's off cuff, it's ad-libbed, and that creates inconsistent results, right? So, yeah, I think you nailed it. And I always love having these conversations with people like you, because we tend to be more generalists, but we're talking, we say the same things, right? You know, yours is very laser focused and such great things, but it's so universally applicable no matter what roles you're hiring for, what you're doing, or dispersed or not dispersed, and all these principles are still exactly the same. And I think that's the biggest myth that hopefully we're able to bust today a little bit for folks, and maybe have somebody can have an aha moment here about that. And so if we need your help, where do we find you, and how do we get in touch with you? And of course, we'll put all this on the page as well.
Yeah, if you're a client looking for software developers or designers or project managers, you can go to scalablepath.com. Check us out there. There's a hire now button where you can click. It makes it really easy to tell us what you're looking for. Or if you're a software developer, or you know, a designer or project manager, and you're looking for work, you can also create a freelancer profile there. So yeah, scalablepath.com is where to find us.
And it'll walk you through a lot of these steps that we talked about then.
Exactly.
Like. Yeah, what you're talking about. That's great that you kind of make us go through those hoops, even if we don't want to. Yep. So I love it. Well, Damien, really nice chatting with you. Thank you very much. And we'll end it here. So.